Hello everyone. I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today we are going to talk about my giant nerd alert, education in biology, and how exactly I utilize that in my writing. So let's get to it. First and foremost, I am a nerd. I was absolutely that kid growing up who spent most of their time reading books. Especially, I had a huge voracity for reading encyclopedia style books. I just devoured them. Any of those books where it was just tons of pictures of things and scientific explanations and charts and graphs and all that stuff, oh, I just ate that up, y'all. I mean, to this day, I love reading stuff like that. I love textbooks. I don't know. It's just who I am. I'm a nerd. It's the way it is. Deal with it. And I utilize that information that I've absorbed over the years to make my writing what it is today. Now, y'all might be asking, what exactly does a biology textbook have to do with writing stuff like Love of the Sea? Writing fantasy means world building. And a lot of people forget that a big part of world building is actually building the world. I know that sounds obvious, but a lot of people spend so much time worrying just about the rules of magic and the political aspects and whatever deities they follow and all that stuff that they forget the actual physical world itself, where the characters live. It's a common thing. And little plug here, my 100 Dangerous Plants role-playing guide by Azukiel Games in Drive-Thru RPG, I actually solved that problem for tabletop gaming players. Is a lot of times when you're playing a campaign, whether it's Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, a lot of people neglect the environment. Where are your characters? Where are they? What are they doing? What are they seeing? What are they experiencing? A lot of them forget that. And that guide that I wrote really answers that question. It gives the gameplay all these different plants and trees and environments that will interact with the characters. So whether it's man-eating trees or little flowers that will completely drain your energy or whatever, it gives that element of the environment is more than just a poorly painted backdrop. And that's a big thing with just writing in general, whether it's writing novels or short stories or whatever have you. Most of the time, people neglect the environment. Your characters are sitting outside in a park having a conversation. A really great way to ground the characters is by giving little snippets of what exactly is the park like that they're sitting in. And this is why I explain to people is that, yes, I have insanely dorky in-depth knowledge about ecosystems and things all the way down to the cellular level. I know all about all that stuff. You don't have to get that specific, but knowing about that kind of stuff certainly helps. It helps me in that I can build an entire ecosystem for a world that my characters are living in, so that then when they go to any portion of the world, whether it's a park or a garden or a forest or a wasteland or a mountain or whatever, I'm prepared. I know exactly what they're going to face. I know exactly what that area is going to be like, what's going to be available to them in it, what dangers they're going to have to face. I know the answer to all those questions because in my mind, I've already built the entire ecosystem for that area. And in the story, I'm only going to use actually 10% in the writing itself of what I've crafted up here. Again, going back to that park with our characters sitting in it. In my head, I already know the whole ecosystem of that park is there are ducks, there are swans, there's duckweed, there's algae, there's moss growing on the trees. What kind of trees are they? Oh, well, we're in the Midwest United States, so there's elm trees and oak trees and birch trees and ash trees, and there's daisies and there's morning glory and there's buttercups and there's grass and there's crabgrass and there's nettles. And okay, so they want to have a picnic, and the hapless guy spreads out their blanket next to an anthill, or he spreads it out right next to a patch of nettles, and when he leans back, he puts his hands right into the nettles. Or, wow, he was really smart and he picked this beautiful shady spot under this 100-year oak tree, and it's looking right out on the lake, and they can see the swans gliding by. all of this stuff has to do with the environment. Knowing all this stuff has to do with my background in biology, and that I can craft what is the entire 360 view of this location. What are the little details I want to pick from that and actually put in the story so that I can ground them in an actual space, is what that comes down to. And putting those little details in your story really does make a difference. And as I've said in some of my other videos, I do find it very frustrating that this new modern take on writing is to be super minimalist and to basically rip all of the detail out of your story. I don't agree with that. If that's your style of writing, more power to you, and I'm not trying to throw shade or insult anybody. It's just, your characters need a world to live in, and your reader needs details of some kind in order to ground your characters in the world that they live in. Otherwise, they're just floating around in a snow globe for all we know. And I know that sounds super silly, but if you think about it, if you read a story and there's literally no description about where the characters are or anything about the world around them, you could literally put them inside a snow globe and it doesn't make any difference to the story. That's kind of alarming. That's like writing 101. Don't do that. Anyway, I digress. And writing fantasy in particular, it is so important to be able to flesh out the world by creating the actual world. So that begs the question, what kind of animals are there in this world? And yes, dragons are animals. Unless you want to make them into like the sentient being kind of things. I mean, that's a whole other thing. But you get what I'm saying. What kind of animals are there? Are they magical? Are they non-magical? How do they work? How do they interact with the other animals in this area? How do they interact with humans? Do they like humans? Do they like eating humans? Do they not like humans? Do they run away from humans? How do they interact with the environment? Do they like eating plants? Do they like eating other animals? Do they subsist on something else entirely? Photosynthesis, magic, whatever. All of these questions are important. And this is why I talk about ecosystems. An ecosystem means that you have the full environment working together. So that means you have the bottom of the food chain, you have all the plants, and then above that you have the herbivores that eat the plants, and then above that you have the predators that eat the herbivores, and you can go up the chain of predators. And that's where we get the term apex predator. An apex predator means it's at the top of the food chain. There's nothing that eats it. And there are sometimes some interconnectedness between different predators. So let's say, for instance, mongoose and cobras are a really good example of this, or honestly any snake, not just cobras, any snake. Snakes will happily kill mongooses. Mongooses will happily kill snakes. They will eat each other. They are both on the same plane of the food chain, and then depending on the situation, they can be above or below, depending on how it goes, whether it's directly mongoose eating snake or snake eating mongoose. But they also eat other things. They are also predators that eat other things, and they are above those things in the food chain. And this is what I'm talking about with understanding how these interconnected things work, is that maybe they don't all necessarily need to end up on the page in your story, but you need to understand how exactly the world works. For example, let's say you have dragons in your world, and let's say they're not the sentient being kind of dragons. Let's say they're the giant fire-breathing, flying around reptile that's kind of dumb and just really likes eating and killing things. Okay, that's fine. What does your dragon eat? And let me tell you, it's an apex predator, and depending on how big of a dragon you want, whether it's the size of a horse or it's the size of a house, really depends on what exactly are you going to have in your world that's going to be able to sustain an animal like that. If you have a dragon the size of a house in your story, that's a lot of food. Like, go do a Google search real quick and see how many pounds of food a lion needs to eat. Let me tell you, it's a lot. It's a lot. Now multiply that for an animal the size of a house. That is a lot. If you have a dragon that big, I'm pretty sure it's decimating all of the livestock it can find within a 20-mile radius, or even a 50-mile or even a 100-mile radius, depending on how big this thing is and how much territory it has to itself. And there's another thing, territory. Predators, especially apex predators, are very territorial. They don't want other predators in their territory because that means less food for them. So that means that your dragon the size of a house is going to make sure other dragons are not in its territory. So maybe you end up having a fight because another dragon comes into this dragon's territory, and now you have 2 dragons above your village trying to fight over the territory. On top of that, it's also important to remember the food chain, because as an apex predator, that means I'm sure there's other levels of predators underneath it. Your dragon's probably also killing off the other predators in order to ensure that it doesn't have competition as well as it can eat them. So I'm pretty sure your village is probably not going to have a wolf problem because your dragon's busy eating and killing them to make sure, 1, the wolves are not eating its livestock that it wants to eat, and 2, hey, you know what? A wolf is a pretty tasty snack for a dragon. That's fine too. Prefer sheep, but a wolf will do. It's that sort of making your world make sense sort of thing, is examining those things from a biological point of view, is that you can't just have a dragon the size of a house and have no explanation for how that thing exists in your world. You cannot sit here and tell me that that thing can eat 1 strawberry a month and it's fine. Unless you have some really good explanation, and it's probably going to involve a lot of magic and a lot of whatever. But realistically, let's be realistic, y'all. What your reader is really going to actually believe. You need to take these kind of things into consideration. How exactly have I presented that kind of stuff in my own personal writing? For my novel, Love of the Sea, one of the explanations that I give, because we have a rather large kingdom, and it's a coastal kingdom, so that means a good portion of their territory is ocean. And I do talk about that one of their big import exports is fish, that they have a lot of fishing industry in their kingdom. But because I know that that's just not sustainable for how large I have made Paradigm, I have to add to that. So I added to the environments that they also have a large swath of forest territory. Forests tend to be very rich in different resources, whether it's timber, animals, all that kind of stuff. It's going to have a lot of resources that you need in order to fuel a large kingdom. And in that, I explain the food situation with boars. Boars are like 500-pound pigs. They're enormous. That's a lot of meat. That can feed a lot of people. So that's how I kind of offset that explanation so that my kingdom isn't completely overfishing their territory, because that would be super unrealistic for how large I have made this kingdom. By offsetting it with creating a forest territory in addition, and then in there adding in these big animals that they can hunt and feed a lot of people off of only 1 animal at a time, helps to offset that. As well as it also reinforces the historical aspect of, in real life, historically, monarchs and nobility have often hunted big prey like stags and boars and bears and just anything that's big. They love to hunt stuff that's big. So having a big thing that they can show off their status and wealth by hunting, as well as it's going to feed a big portion of the people living in that castle, really helps to solve a lot of logistical problems in that situation. And again, that's using basic biology to explain world building in your story. And if you notice, none of those things that I mentioned have to do with fantasy specifically in any capacity. I could write about a completely 100% magic-free, realistic story, and all of that would still make sense. And that's kind of the idea of using biology, is that yes, of course, in fantasy there's magic and magical explanations and all that. There's plenty of magic in Love of the Sea, y'all, tons. But what helps ground the magic in your world is having plenty of realistic stuff in your world too. I'll give y'all an example of what I call magic that's just on a runaway train. It's where you're expecting your readers to accept too much. It's you're creating things that are completely unrealistic and impossible and your reader is going to think it's dumb, or it's going to be confusing, or it's just going to be like, why did you even bother with this? So an example, in one of the writing workshops that I was in the past, there was this very frustrating writer that I dealt with that I was helping to critique one of their stories. They decided to completely ignore some of the most super basic things with biology, and their explanation was, well, it's magic. And I tried to tell them why that's not an explanation. That's not good enough. And of course, they didn't listen to me, and I was like, okay, fine. Because at a certain point with those kind of things, you just have to cut your losses and just not care and let people fail. What this impossible ignoring biology thing was that they explained that the mating ritual for this one particular sentient creature being thing was that when they get aroused, they fall asleep. I'm going to let you all think about that for a minute. Arousal, which typically, biologically speaking, is characterized by increased blood flow. So your blood is flowing faster to all the parts of your body and also flowing pretty fast to certain parts of your body. You're getting excited. Your heart is beating faster in order to pump all that blood around, as well as the emotional response of you're excited. The last thing you're going to do if you're aroused is go to sleep. Unless you have some sort of narcolepsy or, sleeping, some sort of disorder, some sort of medical condition where that's typically tied to you're so excited and your heart's beating so fast that your body kind of has to do the kill switch, where it's just, we have to go to sleep because this is too much. And even then, it's because you're too excited. It's not because, oh, I'm so excited, it's making me very sleepy. No. I'm getting wound up just thinking about it again. So it's stuff like that. You cannot take a very basic biology concept like that and then tell the reader magic. No, don't do that. So that's another aspect that I talk about with explaining to people why it's important to keep things realistic and respect biology in fantasy stories, because with fantasy, what your readers are doing is they are suspending their disbelief, and you have to give them a good enough reason to trust you, the writer, for them to suspend their disbelief. You have to give them an explanation. Whether how simple the explanation is or how complicated the explanation is really doesn't matter, as long as it makes sense. You have to give that to them in order for them to be like, okay, I will accept this. But you can't just have Wonderland level nonsense just 100% through your story and have absolutely nothing realistic, no reality for your reader to grasp on, for them to want to slog through your story, because it's not going to make any sense. They're not going to have anything to ground on, and they're not going to have any trust invested in order for them to suspend their disbelief, and it's just going to be exhausting for them. Like I said with those trade-offs, with Love of the Sea, I have some very high fantasy concepts in that story, such as I create a creature called the Panya. It is this really big predatory bird dinosaur thing, and it eats meat, and it's big, and it's scary, and it's magical, and it attacks people at one point. And I build that trust with my readers for them to suspend their disbelief that, okay, this really big, scary dinosaur bird creature thing exists in this world, and it makes sense in this world, because I'm going to give you the realistic explanation of how Princess Nefara tamed this thing, has any sort of control over this thing, the trust that she has built with this creature, and then the fact that even with all of that, this creature can still be beyond her control and still be an animal predator. Giving that to my readers helps them to build that trust with me and to understand, okay, this is a fantastical creature, but it is still a realistic creature, and it is going to act like a realistic creature. I'm not just going to suddenly, in the middle of the story, have the Panya just all of a sudden sit up out of nowhere and start quoting Shakespeare, because that would make absolutely no sense for this creature that I have built, this big, powerful, animalistic predator, is not going to suddenly have the brain powers talk and start talking about smart stuff. It's just not. And I can't sit there and have that random scene in there and then tell my readers, magic. Because they're going to be like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Why? Why is the Panya doing that? It wouldn't do that. Why do you have this in here? So that's why I say, make sure that your fantasy makes sense and it's realistic and it's grounded in some sort of existing biological reality. It's going to make your fantasy a lot easier to write if you base it in those paramount fundamentals. I hope this has been helpful, y'all. It is something that I am super passionate about. I talk about it a lot in my videos. I want to thank y'all so much for tuning in today. Be sure to give this video a like, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please be sure to subscribe. I want to thank y'all so much. Take care. Bye-bye.